Good
What would
evening,
you do if
everyone.
the man who
I'd like
called
to
you
introduce you
broken,
to the newest
who
members of the
replaced you with a
Ashford
younger
family,
woman,
your
who
grandchildren,
told you that
Rick
you
and
were the
Patricia.
reason he couldn't have
This is the
children,
most
discovered
beautiful
3 years
sunset
later
I've ever
that you
seen.
were carrying his
Only
quadruplets
because
the
I'm
entire
sharing it with
time?
you.
This is the story of Sarah Montgomery, a successful marketing executive who gave her billionaire husband 5 years of her life, 5 years of trying for a family, 5 years of being told
Yes,
she was
Sarah.
the problem. Then on
You
their
are
5th
looking at
anniversary, over a
healthy
dinner she spent days
quadruplets.
preparing, he said 5 words
I
that destroyed
recognize
everything.
this document, yes.
Maybe you're the
It clearly
mistake.
shows the
3
defendant
weeks
transferred
later,
the
he was
funds just
engaged to his
days before the
24-year-old
acquisition was
mistress.
finalized.
But here's what he
Look
didn't
at
know.
them.
Sarah
They
was
truly
already
are
8 weeks pregnant
everything.
with 4 babies, his babies. She decided he didn't deserve to know. She raised those children alone, built an empire, became the woman she was always meant to be, until one photograph changed everything. When Richard Ashford discovered the truth, he came for those children with lawyers, money, and his manipulative mother who had secrets of her own, secrets that would shock a courtroom full of people. This is a story about a woman who was told she wasn't enough and proved she was everything. Stay until the end to see how Sarah destroyed the man who tried to break her, because this revenge, it's absolutely perfect. The spotlight hit Sarah Montgomery like a physical force, momentarily blinding her as she stepped onto the stage at the Manhattan Plaza Hotel. 500 guests filled the grand ballroom, their champagne glasses reflecting the crystal chandeliers above. The annual charity gala was the event of the season, and tonight, Sarah was the keynote speaker. Behind her, a massive screen flickered to life, displaying a photograph that made several people in the audience gasp. 4 beautiful 3-year-old children smiled at the camera, their faces a perfect blend of innocence and joy. Sarah gripped the microphone, her stunning emerald gown catching the light as she turned to face the crowd. Her voice was steady, confident, carrying the weight of a story that would change everything. 3 years ago, Sarah began, letting her words hang in the air. I was told I was broken, defective, unable to give my husband the one thing that mattered. In the 3rd row, Richard Ashford's face went pale. His champagne glass froze halfway to his lips. Beside him, his mother Patricia clutched her pearls, her mouth forming a perfect circle of shock. I was discarded, Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger, replaced with someone younger, someone supposedly more capable. My marriage ended because I was convinced I was the problem. The crowd murmured, leaning forward in their seats. At the back of the ballroom, Amber Valentine, Rick's second ex-wife, stood frozen by the bar, her face a mask of confusion. Tonight, Sarah said, gesturing to the screen behind her, I would like to introduce the world to proof that I was never the problem. The ballroom doors opened. 4 children ran onto the stage, their laughter filling the space like music. They wore matching outfits, coordinated but not identical, each one a unique masterpiece. Micah, with sandy brown hair and warm brown eyes, reached Sarah first. Malcolm, with his mother's darker complexion and sharp, distinctive features, followed close behind. Zara, Sarah's miniature twin, twirled in her dress. Quinn, with fair skin and curly dark hair, walked more slowly, taking everything in with observing eyes. The audience erupted in applause, but Sarah's attention was locked on Rick. She watched as he stood, his chair scraping against the floor. His face had gone from pale to ashen, his eyes fixed on the children with an expression of absolute horror. Patricia grabbed his arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his designer suit. Richard, she hissed, loud enough for those nearby to hear. Those children? Look like me, Rick finished, his voice barely a whisper. Sarah smiled, cold and victorious. She had waited 3 years for this moment, 3 years of raising these children alone, building her empire, of becoming the woman she was always meant to be. And now, with the entire Manhattan elite watching, she was revealing the truth that would destroy the man who had destroyed her. You're probably wondering how we got here, Sarah said into the microphone, her children gathered around her like soldiers rallying to their general. Let me take you back to where the fairy tale turned into a nightmare. The screen behind her shifted, displaying a new image, a wedding photo from 5 years earlier. Sarah, radiant in white, stood beside Rick, who looked at her like she had hung every star in the sky. This is the story of a man who threw away a diamond because he was convinced it was glass, Sarah said. And this is the story of how that diamond learned to shine on her own. 5 years earlier, Sarah Montgomery was 25 years old and conquering the world one boardroom at a time. Her corner office in a Manhattan high-rise overlooked Central Park, a view she had earned through pure talent and relentless determination. "Sarah, the Crawford executives are ready for you," her assistant called from the doorway. Sarah gathered her presentation materials, her natural hair styled in elegant twists, her navy suit tailored to perfection. She walked into the conference room where four men twice her age sat waiting, their expressions skeptical. By the time she finished her pitch 90 minutes later, all four were leaning forward, completely sold on her marketing strategy for their $5 million campaign. This was Sarah's life. This was who she was. A woman who had clawed her way up from working-class Baltimore, who had watched her mother Maggie work double nursing shifts to put food on the table, who had promised herself she would never need anyone to validate her worth. But on a crisp October evening, at a charity gala at the Plaza Hotel, Sarah's carefully constructed world shifted on its axis. She was running the event, orchestrating every detail with military precision. The flowers were perfect. The auction items were displayed flawlessly. The keynote speaker was scheduled to take the stage in exactly 12 minutes. That keynote speaker was Richard Ashford, heir to a real estate empire, third-generation wealth, the kind of man who wore his privilege like a second skin. Sarah stood at the back of the ballroom, clipboard in hand, watching as Rick took the podium. He was handsome in the way rich men often are, polished and perfect, his sandy brown hair styled just so, his blue eyes commanding attention. He spoke about giving back to the community, about responsibility, about the future. The crowd applauded enthusiastically. Cameras flashed. Rick smiled, comfortable in the spotlight. But Sarah noticed something others might have missed. He had used the same poverty statistic twice in his speech, undermining his credibility with repetition. When Rick stepped down from the podium, Sarah approached him with her professional smile firmly in place. "Impressive presentation, Mr. Ashford," she said, extending her hand. "Though you might want to diversify your data points. Using the same statistic twice undermines credibility." Rick's eyebrows lifted. People didn't critique him, especially not at events where he was the star attraction. "I'm sorry," he said slowly, studying her more closely. "I didn't catch your name." "That's because I didn't throw it," Sarah replied, the hint of a smile on her lips. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have an auction to coordinate." She turned and walked away, leaving Richard Ashford standing alone in the middle of a crowded ballroom, experiencing something he hadn't felt in years, genuine intrigue. It took Rick 3 weeks to find out who she was. 3 weeks of discreet inquiries, of asking the event organizers, of finally convincing someone at Crawford and Associates to give him a name. Lennox Hargrove, marketing executive, 25 years old, single. The next day, flowers arrived at Sarah's office. A modest arrangement, not the overwhelming displays Rick usually commissioned. The card read simply, "I diversified my data points. Dinner to discuss what else I'm doing wrong." Sarah laughed when she read it, then threw the card away. But she kept the flowers. More flowers arrived, different arrangements, different messages, all with the same underlying request. After the fifth delivery, Sarah's assistant commented, "He's persistent." "Persistence doesn't obligate me to respond," Sarah replied, though she was admittedly amused. In week 4, Rick changed tactics. He made a $50,000 donation to the youth organization from the gala, listing it in Sarah's name. That got her attention. She called him on a Thursday afternoon. "While I appreciate the donation, Mr. Ashford, I don't appreciate being used as a tax write-off for your ego." "It's not a write-off if it's in your name," Rick countered smoothly. "And my ego would be better satisfied if you'd agree to dinner." "You're bothering me now," Sarah said, but there was warmth in her tone to us. "Then what's one more evening?" Despite every instinct telling her this man represented complications she didn't need, Sarah heard herself saying yes. Their first dinner was at a quiet French restaurant in the West Village. Rick had chosen it specifically because it wasn't showy. No paparazzi, no scene, just good food and conversation. He learned that night that Sarah wasn't impressed by his wealth. When he mentioned his properties, she changed the subject. When he name-dropped powerful associates, she looked bored. But when he asked about her mother, about growing up in Baltimore, about the moment she knew she wanted to work in marketing, her entire face changed. She became animated, passionate, fully alive. "You actually listen when people talk," she observed halfway through the meal. "That's rare for someone in your position." "What position is that?" Rick asked, genuinely curious. "Rich, powerful, accustomed to being the most important person in every room." Rick laughed, a real laugh, not the practiced chuckle he usually deployed at business dinners. "You don't pull punches, do you?" "Life's too short for games," Sarah said simply. "My mother taught me that honesty saves time." By the end of the evening, Rick knew he was in trouble. This woman didn't need him. She didn't want anything from him, and she just wanted him to be real. Their courtship unfolded over the next 18 months, like a story neither of them had expected to write. Rick flew Sarah to Paris for their third date, expecting her to be impressed by the private jet and five-star hotel. Instead, what captivated her was that he remembered she preferred tea over coffee, that he listened to her talk about a difficult client without offering unsolicited advice, that he treated the flight attendants and hotel staff with genuine respect rather than dismissive entitlement. On their last night in Paris, they walked along the Seine as lights from the bridges danced on the dark water. "You're different from what I expected," Sarah admitted, her hand in his. Rick stopped walking and turned to face her. "I could say the same about you. You challenge me, Sarah. You make me want to be better than I am." "You're already better than you think," she said softly. "You just needed someone to see it." He kissed her there on the riverbank, and for the first time in his carefully controlled life, Richard Ashford felt like he was exactly where he belonged. Back in New York, their relationship deepened in ways that surprised both of them. Rick brought Sarah home to meet his family, a prospect that filled him with more anxiety than any business deal ever had. The Ashford estate in Connecticut was everything Sarah expected. Imposing, immaculate, designed to intimidate. Patricia Ashford, Rick's mother, greeted them in the formal living room, every inch the society matriarch in her designer dress in perfect pearls. "Marketing," Patricia repeated when Sarah explained her career, her tone making it sound like Sarah had said garbage collection. "How contemporary." "I prefer to think of it as essential," Sarah replied smoothly, refusing to be diminished. "After all, even the oldest families need to stay relevant in changing times." Patricia's eyes narrowed slightly, reassessing this woman her son had brought home. Then she smiled, thin and calculated. "Indeed, you're quite articulate, my dear." It wasn't warm, but it wasn't openly hostile. Sarah would take it. Rick's father, Thomas, was quieter, studying Sarah with thoughtful eyes. Later, as they were leaving, he pulled Sarah aside. "My son has never looked at anyone the way he looks at you," Thomas said quietly. "Whatever Patricia says or does, remember that." Sarah met Maggie at a Sunday dinner in Baltimore, and the interrogation was far more direct. "You hurt my baby," Maggie said plainly, fixing Rick with a stare that had withered stronger men. "And money won't save you from me. Are we clear?" "Crystal clear, ma'am," Rick replied, and he may have been it. But Maggie saw how he looked at her daughter, like Sarah was the answer to a question he'd been asking his whole life. She decided to give him a chance. Rick proposed on a Manhattan rooftop 6 months later, the city lights spread out below them like scattered diamonds. "I don't have a speech prepared," he admitted, holding the ring box. "Every version I practiced sounded too rehearsed, too formal. So I'll just say this: you are the most extraordinary person I've ever met. You make me better. You make me real. Marry me, Sarah. Build a life with me." She said yes without hesitation. Their wedding 18 months after they met was a perfect blend of both their worlds. The ceremony brought together Sarah's colleagues from the marketing world, her childhood friends from Baltimore, Rick's business associates, and his Connecticut social circle. It shouldn't have worked. It did. "To my wife," Rick toasted during the reception, his eyes never leaving Sarah's face, "who taught me that the best things in life are the ones you have to earn." The first 3 years of their marriage were everything Sarah had dreamed of and more. She launched her own consulting firm with Rick's full support, though she refused his money, taking only his advice, his connections, and his unwavering belief that she would succeed. She did. Their home in Connecticut became a sanctuary. Sunday mornings, they would stay in bed until noon, talking about everything and nothing. Rick would trace patterns on her skin and tell her about the family he wanted to build with her. "Our kids are going to be incredible," he would say, his hand resting on her stomach. "They'll have your brilliance, your beauty, your stubbornness." "What about your stubbornness?" Sarah would tease, running her fingers through his hair. "Perfect balance," he'd laugh. At night, he held her close, whispering promises into her hair. Promises of forever. Promises of a love that would weather any storm. Promises of a family that would be built on the foundation they were creating together. Sarah believed every word. But by their 4th anniversary, cracks were beginning to form beneath the surface, invisible at first, then impossible to ignore. The trouble started, as it so often did, with Patricia Ashford. Sarah was in the kitchen making tea when she heard the front door open. She hadn't been expecting anyone, but Patricia had insisted on keeping a key for emergencies. "Sarah, dear," Patricia called out, letting herself into the living room. "We need to talk." Sarah brought the tea service, her jaw tight. Patricia settled herself on the sofa as though she owned the place, which in her mind, she probably did. 4 years, Patricia announced without preamble. 4 years of marriage and still no grandchildren. The Ashford name must continue. "You know this. Time is passing." Her eyes landed on Sarah's flat stomach with the precision of a laser. Sarah kept her smile perfectly in place, though her hands trembled slightly as she poured the tea. "Rick and I are enjoying being just the two of us for now." "Enjoyment is all well and good, dear, but legacy is what matters. Richard is an only child now." Patricia's emphasis on the word "now" was deliberate, a reminder of the tragedy that haunted this family. "The responsibility falls to him. I do hope there isn't a problem." The word hung in the air like an accusation. "No problem," Rick said quickly from the doorway, startling both women. "We're just not in a rush." But after Patricia left, the seed had been planted. What neither of them mentioned to Rick's mother, what they barely acknowledged to each other, was that they had been trying for over a year. Sarah had stopped taking birth control 14 months earlier. They had both agreed it was time. They were financially stable, emotionally ready, building the life they wanted. She had expected to be pregnant within a few months. The first few negative tests hadn't worried her. These things took time, she reasoned. Stress from work could affect cycles. Timing wasn't always perfect. But month after month, the tests showed the same single line. By month 8, Sarah scheduled an appointment with her gynecologist. The doctor ran blood work, checked hormone levels, performed an ultrasound. "Everything looks perfectly normal," the doctor assured her. "Sometimes it just takes longer for some couples. Try to relax. Stress can actually inhibit conception." Rick went to see a specialist at Sarah's gentle insistence. He returned with the same news. "Completely healthy," he reported, though Sarah noticed he wouldn't quite meet her eyes. "The doctor said we're both fine. It'll happen when it happens." But as the months continued to pass with no pregnancy, something began to shift in their home. The shift was subtle at first, so subtle that Sarah almost convinced herself she was imagining it. Rick's touches, which had always been frequent and affectionate, became less so. He used to pull her close while they watched television, his fingers tracing absent patterns on her arm. Now he sat on the opposite end of the couch, his laptop open, his attention elsewhere. Their physical intimacy, which had once been passionate and spontaneous, became scheduled and clinical. It happened during her fertile window because it had to, not because they wanted to connect. "Maybe we're trying too hard," Sarah suggested one night after another mechanical encounter that left her feeling emptier than before. "We've been letting it happen naturally for over a year," Rick replied, his voice flat. "Clearly that's not working." He rolled away from her, and Sarah stared at his back in the darkness, feeling a coldness that had nothing to do with the temperature. What Sarah didn't know was that Rick's distance had another cause entirely. Her name was Amber Valentine, and she had entered their lives through a downtown development project that Thornwell Industries was renovating. Amber was 24, blonde, beautiful in the obvious way that required money and youth to maintain. She had been hired as the interior designer, assigned to work directly with Rick on design approvals for the building's lobby and common areas. Their first meeting was professional enough, but Amber had done her research. She knew Rick was wealthy, married, under pressure to produce an heir. She recognized opportunity when she saw it. Over the following weeks, she made sure every design presentation required an in-person meeting. She scheduled them for late afternoon when she knew he'd be tired and stressed. She wore clothing that was professional enough to be appropriate, but fitted enough to be noticed. She asked questions about his business, his properties, his plans for expansion. She listened like every word he spoke was profound, and slowly, carefully, she began to introduce more personal topics. "You seem tense today," she observed during their fourth meeting, her voice soft with manufactured concern. "Is everything all right?" Rick should have shut down the question immediately. Should have maintained professional boundaries. Should have thought of Sarah, of his vows, of the life they had built together. Instead, he heard himself saying, "Just the usual pressures, nothing I can't handle." "I'm sure you handle everything beautifully," Amber said, her eyes holding his just a beat too long. "But everyone needs someone to talk to sometimes. I'm a good listener, if you ever need one." That was the moment he should have walked away. He didn't. By their fifth anniversary, Rick was working later and later, his excuses growing thinner each time. "Big project," he would text. "Don't wait up." Sarah would eat dinner alone at the table they used to share, her food growing cold as she refreshed her phone, hoping for updates that rarely came. When he did come home, he smelled of expensive restaurants and scotch, his eyes distant and cool. "How was your day?" she would ask, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy. "Fine," he would answer, already heading upstairs. "I'm exhausted. Going to bed." The man she had married, the one who used to stay up talking with her until 3 in the morning, who valued her opinions, who treated her like a partner, was disappearing. In his place was a stranger who looked at her like she was a puzzle he couldn't solve, or worse, like she was a disappointment he was tired of managing. Sarah found the jewelry receipt on a Tuesday afternoon, tucked in the pocket of Rick's suit jacket when she took it to the dry cleaner. The necklace had cost $12,000. She had never received a necklace. "What's this?" she asked that evening, holding up the receipt. Rick barely glanced at it. "Client gift for the interior designer on the downtown project. Professional courtesy." $12,000 is quite the courtesy, Sarah observed, keeping her voice neutral. "It's business, Sarah, you wouldn't understand." The dismissal stung more than the lie. That night, alone in her home office, Sarah typed Amber Valentine Interior Designer into Google. The search results showed a young woman with platinum blonde hair, perfect teeth, and a figure that looked good in designer clothes. Her company website featured her portfolio and a photo of her smiling confidently at the camera. Sarah stared at the image, a cold feeling settling in her stomach. But she pushed it away. She trusted her husband. She had to trust her husband. The signs continued to accumulate. Rick's phone, which used to sit casually on counters and tables, was now always in his pocket, always face down, always protected with a password he had changed without explanation. When it buzzed during dinner, one of the rare evenings he was actually home, he would grab it quickly, his face tightening with something that looked like guilt. "Work?" Sarah would ask. "Always," he would reply, typing out responses he angled away from her view. His shirts came back from the cleaner, smelling of perfume that wasn't hers. Light, floral, young. "New detergent at the dry cleaner?" Sarah asked, holding up a shirt. "Maybe," Rick said without looking up from his laptop. "I don't pay attention to that stuff." But Sarah paid attention to everything. It was her job to notice details, to see patterns, to understand what wasn't being said. And what wasn't being said was screaming at her from every corner of her marriage. She decided to fight for what they had, to remind Rick of who they were together, of the love that had brought them to this point. Their 5th anniversary was approaching, and Sarah planned the perfect evening. She took the day off work, something she rarely did. She drove to the farmer's market in Greenwich and bought the finest ingredients she could find. Fresh herbs, the best cut of filet mignon, vegetables from local farms, the bottle of wine they had saved from their wedding, meant for a special occasion. This felt special enough. This felt like their marriage depended on it. Back home, she transformed their dining room into something from a magazine spread. Candles flickered on every surface, casting warm light across the mahogany table. She arranged white roses, Rick's favorite, in crystal vases throughout the room. The good china came out of storage, along with the silver they had received as wedding gifts but rarely used. In the kitchen, she prepared his favorite meal with the precision of a chef: filet mignon with rosemary and garlic, roasted vegetables from their own garden, the chocolate souffle that had taken her 3 attempts to master when they were newlyweds. Back when impressing him had felt like a bore rather than a desperate necessity. She wore the red dress, the one he had bought her for their second anniversary, the one he always said made her look like she had stepped out of a dream. By 7 o'clock, everything was perfect. The table was set, the food was ready to be heated, the candles were lit. Sarah sat on the couch in the living room waiting. By 9 o'clock, the candles had burned down an inch. The food sat cold in the kitchen. Sarah refreshed her phone for the 100th time. No messages, no missed calls. By 11:15, she was still sitting there, the red dress now feeling like a costume from a play no one else was performing. The front door opened at 11:30. Rick stopped short when he saw the dining room, his eyes taking in the candles, the roses, the carefully set table. His expression wasn't pleasure or appreciation or even guilt. It was irritation. "What's all this?" he asked, loosening his tie. Sarah forced brightness into her voice, though her smile felt like it might crack her face. "Dinner. I wanted us to have a nice evening together. Just the two of us." "I already ate," Rick said flatly. Client dinner ran late. No apology, no acknowledgement of the effort she had put into this evening. No explanation for why he hadn't called. "I can reheat everything," Sarah offered quickly, standing up. "It'll just take a few minutes. The souffle might not be perfect, but—" "I'm not hungry, Sarah." He walked through the room, methodically blowing out candles, as though her effort was nothing more than a fire hazard. Each extinguished flame felt like another piece of their marriage dying. "Rick, please," Sarah said, her voice breaking slightly. "Just sit with me for a few minutes. We never talk anymore. I feel like you're slipping away from me." Rick paused, his hand on the light switch. For a moment, something flickered across his face. Then it was gone, replaced by something harder, colder. "Talk about what?" he asked. "About us. About what's happening between us. About why you're never here anymore. Why you look at me like you can't stand the sight of me. Why everything feels like it's falling apart." The words tumbled out faster than she meant them to, the desperation she had been trying to hide finally breaking through. Rick turned to face her fully, and in the dim light of the remaining candles, Sarah barely recognized him. "Maybe I wouldn't be slipping away if you could give me what I need," he said, his voice cutting through the space between them like a blade. Sarah's stomach dropped. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying 5 years of trying, Sarah. 5 years of failure. Maybe you're the mistake." The words landed like physical blows. Sarah felt the air leave her lungs. "The doctors said we both have no medical issues," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "This isn't just on me. We're both—" "Then maybe the problem isn't medical," Rick interrupted, his voice rising now. "Maybe we just weren't meant to be. Maybe this whole marriage was a mistake from the start." Sarah stared at the man she had loved, the man she had built a life with, and realized she didn't recognize him anymore. "You're blaming me," she said, the words coming out flat and cold. "For both of us struggling with this, you're blaming only me." "I'm stating facts," Rick shot back. 5 years, nothing. My mother is right. Maybe it's time we both accepted reality." Sarah felt something inside her crystallize, turning from soft and hopeful to hard and sharp. "Get out," she said quietly. "What?" "Get out of this room. Get out of my sight." Her voice was stronger now, steadier. "I spent 3 days planning this evening because I thought we had something worth fighting for. Clearly, I was wrong." For a moment, Rick stood there looking like he wanted to say something else. Some part of him, buried deep beneath the pressure and disappointment in Patricia's poison, seemed to recognize what he was destroying. But that moment passed. He turned and left the room without another word. Sarah heard his footsteps on the stairs, heard the bedroom door close behind him. She stood alone among the flickering candles and dying roses, surrounded by the wreckage of her last attempt to save her marriage. The red dress suddenly felt ridiculous. The cold food on the perfect china seemed like evidence of her own foolishness. She had tried to save something that was already dead. She didn't know then, standing in that dining room with tears streaming down her face, that she was already carrying the miracle Rick claimed was impossible. That the night before this catastrophe, during one last desperate attempt to connect, they had created not one life but four. She didn't know that in 8 weeks, she would discover the truth that would change everything. All she knew was that her marriage was over. 3 weeks later, the divorce papers arrived on her kitchen counter. No warning, no conversation, just legal documents and a note in Rick's handwriting. My attorney will be in touch. Sarah stood in her empty house staring at the papers and whispered to no one, 5 years. 5 years and this is how it ends? 2 days after receiving the divorce papers, Sarah was standing in line at a coffee shop near her office when she overheard a conversation that shattered what was left of her world. Did you see the society pages? One woman asked her companion, both of them in designer workout clothes and carrying yoga mats. Rick Ashford is already engaged. The divorce isn't even finalized yet, the other woman replied, laughing. That was fast. New fiancé is gorgeous, though, much younger than the ex-wife. Sarah excused herself from the line and walked in a daze to the nearest newsstand. She bought every society magazine they carried, her hands trembling as she handed over her credit card. On a bench outside, she opened the first magazine with fingers that felt numb. Page 3 stopped her heart. The photograph was professionally taken, clearly staged. Rick and a stunning blonde woman sat at Le Bernardin, one of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants. The woman's left hand was positioned prominently on the table, showing off a diamond ring that was easily twice the size of the one Sarah had worn for 5 years. The headline read, Real estate mogul Richard Ashford engaged to interior designer following quiet divorce. Sarah forced herself to read the article, each word a fresh wound. Wishford, 38, announced his engagement to interior designer Amber Valentine, 24, at an intimate dinner last evening. The couple began dating following Ashford's recent divorce from marketing consultant Sarah Montgomery. We're thrilled to start our family together, Valentine commented. Sources close to the family suggest a summer wedding is planned. Start our family. The phrase was a deliberate knife twist, designed to communicate exactly why the previous marriage had failed. Sarah sat on that bench staring at the photo as the full scope of her husband's betrayal became clear. While she had been planning romantic dinners and fighting for their marriage, Rick had already been building a future with someone else. The perfume on his shirts, the late nights, the jewelry he claimed was a client gift. All of it had been for her, for Amber, for months, maybe longer. Sarah called her mother, her voice breaking. Mama, I need you. Maggie arrived from Baltimore within 3 hours, having dropped everything the moment she heard her daughter's pain. She found Sarah still sitting on that bench, magazines scattered around her, staring at nothing. Baby girl, Maggie said, wrapping Sarah in the kind of fierce embrace only mothers can give. That night in Sarah's Manhattan apartment, Sarah finally let herself break. She sobbed into her mother's shoulder, all the pain and humiliation and confusion pouring out in great, heaving waves. Why wasn't I enough, Mama? Sarah cried. I gave him everything. I loved him completely. Why wasn't that enough? Maggie held her daughter's face in her hands, forcing Sarah to look at her. Listen to me, baby girl. You are always enough, you hear me? Always. Never let his failures become your definition. That man's inability to see your worth says nothing about you and everything about him. But the children, Sarah whispered. I wanted them so badly. What if he's right? What if I really am? Don't you dare finish that sentence, Maggie interrupted fiercely. The children will come when they're meant to come. And when they do, they'll be blessed to have a mother who knows her worth. A mother who doesn't settle for men who make her feel small. The divorce was finalized 4 weeks later. Sarah didn't fight it. She just wanted it over. She took only what was hers, refusing to battle over assets or property. Her lawyer was frustrated by her refusal to pursue what she was entitled to, but Sarah was adamant. I didn't marry him for his money, she said firmly. And I won't let him think I'm leaving him for it either. It was a matter of dignity, and dignity was something no amount of money could buy. 3 months after the divorce, Rick and Amber's wedding was announced. 500 guests at the Plaza Hotel, coverage in 3 different magazines. Patricia Ashford in her element, finally getting the spectacle she had always wanted. The quotes from the wedding coverage found their way to Sarah through well-meaning friends who thought she should know what was being said. Finally, my son can have the children he's always wanted, Patricia had told the Society reporter. We can't wait to start our family, Amber had gushed to the photographer. Rick is going to be such a wonderful father. This is what happiness looks like, Rick himself had said, his arm around his new bride's waist, both of them beaming at the camera. Sarah read the articles once, then threw them away. She was done being a footnote in Richard Ashford's story. It was time to write her own. 4 weeks after signing the final divorce papers, Sarah Montgomery collapsed in her office. She had thrown herself into work with the desperation of a woman who needed to prove she could build something beautiful from the ashes of her old life. 18-hour days became normal. Weekend client calls became routine. Sleep became optional. Her consulting business was thriving. 3 new major clients, a waiting list of potential projects, industry recognition that had nothing to do with the Ashford name. But success came at a cost. On a humid Tuesday afternoon in September, while presenting a marketing strategy to a tech startup's board of directors, the conference room suddenly tilted sideways. "Miss Montgomery," one of the executives said, reaching toward her. "Are you all right?" Sarah gripped the edge of the table, trying to steady herself as the room continued to spin. "I'm fine. Just need a moment." The words died in her throat as darkness swallowed her whole. She woke up in the back of an ambulance, an EMT checking her pulse while the city blurred past the windows. "What happened?" she asked weakly. "You fainted," the paramedic explained kindly. "Hit the floor pretty hard. We're taking you to Mount Sinai for evaluation." At the hospital, nurses moved efficiently around her bed, taking blood pressure readings, checking her temperature, asking questions she answered through a haze of confusion. When was her last meal? She couldn't remember. When was her last full night's sleep? Weeks ago, maybe months. Any recent stress? The question was almost funny. Rachel Martinez entered the examination room carrying a clipboard and wearing the kind of expression that suggested she had seen everything and was barely surprised by anything. "Miss Montgomery, I'm going to order some blood work and run a few tests," the doctor said. "Fainting can be caused by many things: dehydration, exhaustion, blood sugar issues. We'll figure out what's going on." 3 hours later, Dr. Martinez returned with results that would change everything. "Sarah," the doctor said gently, settling into the chair beside the bed, "when was your last menstrual cycle?" Sarah thought back through the blur of the past few months. Between the divorce proceedings, the stress of starting over, and the demands of rebuilding her business, she had stopped paying attention to her body's rhythms. "I don't know," she admitted. "Maybe 2 months ago? I assumed it was stress. My whole life has been upended lately." Dr. Martinez nodded slowly, her expression carefully neutral. "Stress can definitely affect cycles, but Sarah, you're pregnant." The words didn't compute at first. Sarah stared at the doctor's face, waiting for clarification or correction. "That's impossible," she finally said, her voice flat. "The blood test is definitive, doctor," Martinez replied. "No, you don't understand," Sarah insisted, sitting up straighter despite the dizziness. "I was married for 5 years. We tried constantly. Every specialist said we were fine, but nothing ever happened. I cannot be pregnant." "Sometimes the body works in mysterious ways," the doctor explained patiently. "Chronic stress, emotional, physical, psychological, can absolutely inhibit conception. The hormones released during chronic stress can interfere with ovulation, with implantation, with every part of the reproductive process. When that stress lifts, when your body finally releases that tension, everything can align. It's not common, but it's not unheard of." "I need an ultrasound," Sarah said, her mind racing. "I need to see. I need to know." 20 minutes later, Sarah lay on an examination table with cool gel spread across her stomach while Dr. Martinez moved an ultrasound wand with practiced precision. The screen filled with grainy black and white images that meant nothing to Sarah's untrained eye. The doctor fell silent, her movements becoming more focused, more deliberate. "Is something wrong?" Sarah asked, a new fear creeping into her voice. Dr. Martinez turned the screen towards Sarah, her expression a mixture of professional calm and genuine wonder. "You're not just pregnant," the doctor said carefully. "You're carrying quadruplets." Sarah stared at the screen, at the four tiny forms, at the four distinct heartbeats flickering like candles in the darkness. "Four," she whispered. "Four healthy babies," Dr. Martinez confirmed. "Based on the measurements, you're approximately 8 weeks along." 8 weeks. 2 months. Sarah's mind raced backward through the calendar, calculating dates with the precision of someone whose entire world was shifting on its axis. 8 weeks ago was 2 months ago. 2 months ago, Rick had already moved out. But before he left, there had been that night, the anniversary, before the explosion that destroyed everything. They had been trying one last desperate attempt to connect, to salvage something from the wreckage. She had conceived the night before everything fell apart. The night he told her she was the mistake. The night he walked away from her and their marriage. The irony was almost too much to bear. She was already carrying his children when he left her for being barren. "We need to contact the father," Dr. Martinez was saying. "High-risk pregnancy with quadruplets requires significant support." "You'll need—" "No," Sarah said, her voice ice cold. "Oh. The doctor paused. "Sarah, I understand this is complicated, but—" "He left me because he thought I was broken," Sarah interrupted, each word deliberate and clear. "He chose another woman because he was convinced I was the problem. These babies deserve better than a father who would only want them because they solve his legacy problem. If he finds out later, then I'll deal with it later," Sarah said firmly. "Right now, my only job is bringing these babies into the world safely. Everything else can wait." The door opened and Maggie rushed in, having driven straight from Baltimore the moment the hospital called. "Baby girl," Maggie said, going straight to Sarah's side. "Are you okay? What did the doctor say?" Sarah looked at her mother, at the woman who had raised her alone, with nothing but determination and love, and felt something shift inside her. "Mama," Sarah said, taking Maggie's hand and placing it on her stomach, "you're going to be a grandmother to quadruplets." Maggie's eyes widened, then filled with tears. "4 babies? Baby girl, this is a miracle. A genuine miracle." "He left me because he believed I couldn't give him children," Sarah said, her voice steady now. "He chose another woman because he was convinced I was the problem. These babies deserve a father who wants them for who they are, not because they represent some convenient solution to his family legacy issues." "And if he finds out later?" Maggie asked gently, Sarah's jaw set with determination. "Then I'll deal with it later. But right now, my only job is bringing these children safely into the world. Everything else can wait." Maggie studied her daughter's face and saw something she recognized. The same quiet strength that had carried her through single motherhood years earlier. "These children are going to be so loved," Maggie said softly. "So incredibly loved." "They already are," Sarah whispered, her hands moving to her stomach where 4 tiny miracles were growing. 4 pieces of the future she had dreamed of, taking shape at the exact moment she had been discarded for being unable to create them. Have you ever been told you're not enough, that something fundamental inside you is broken? Have you ever had someone you love look at you and see only inadequacy? It's a wound that cuts deeper than any physical pain, a rejection that makes you question everything you thought you knew about yourself. Sarah had felt that wound, had carried that rejection like a weight on her chest for months, and now, in the cruelest and most beautiful twist of fate, she was about to prove that she had never been broken at all. The pregnancy was immediately classified as high risk. Carrying quadruplets, Dr. Martinez explained in sobering detail, meant increased risk of premature labor, gestational diabetes, preeclampsia, and the very real possibility that one or more babies might not develop properly. Sarah was referred to a maternal fetal medicine specialist who outlined a careful plan for monitoring both mother and babies throughout what would be a challenging pregnancy. "You'll need to modify your lifestyle significantly," Dr. Martinez explained during their first follow-up appointment. "No stress, minimal travel, reduced work schedule. By your 5th month, you'll likely need to be on bed rest." Sarah thought of her consulting business, of the clients who depended on her, of the financial independence she had fought so hard to maintain after the divorce. "I can work remotely," Sarah said. "I can manage my stress levels." "Miss Montgomery, you're carrying 4 babies. Your body is going to be under more strain than you can possibly imagine. Your only job for the next several months is growing healthy children. Everything else is secondary." Sarah wanted to argue, wanted to insist she could do both, But the doctor's expression left no room for negotiation. The first major change was her living situation. The Manhattan apartment, with its sleek lines and city views, suddenly felt impossibly wrong for raising 4 children. Sarah made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. She sold it. "Are you sure about this, baby girl?" Maggie asked, watching her daughter pack boxes while 4 fetuses grew in her belly. "That place represents your independence." "No, Mama," Sarah replied, carefully wrapping a framed photo of her college graduation. "My independence is right here." She placed her hand on her stomach. "This apartment represents who I used to be. It's time to build something new." She bought a 4-bedroom brownstone in Brooklyn, 15 minutes walk from Maggie's house. The neighborhood was filled with young families, tree-lined streets, and the kind of community where people still sat on their stoops in the evening and knew each other's names. The house needed work. The kitchen was outdated, the bathrooms required renovation, and the backyard was more dirt than grass. But it had something the Manhattan apartment had lacked: room to grow. Sarah converted the largest bedroom into a nursery, though at 3 months pregnant, it felt surreal to imagine 4 cribs lined up against the walls. The second bedroom became her office, equipped with everything she needed to run her business remotely. The third was for Maggie, who had quietly begun the process of relocating permanently to help with the babies. Meanwhile, 300 miles away in Connecticut, the marriage Rick had sacrificed everything for was already beginning to crack. Rick and Amber's honeymoon in the French Riviera had been picture perfect, at least from the outside. Amber had made a show of throwing her birth control pills into the Mediterranean, declaring dramatically, "No more barriers, let's make a baby." Rick had smiled and kissed her, ignoring the small voice in his head that sounded uncomfortably like doubt. They returned to Connecticut and settled into the estate that had once been Rick and Sarah's home. Amber immediately began redecorating, erasing every trace of Sarah's presence with aggressive efficiency. Month 1 passed, no pregnancy. Month 2, another negative test. By month 3, Amber's cheerful optimism was beginning to fray. "Maybe we should try harder," she suggested, echoing words Rick had once said to Sarah. By month 6, the conversations were growing tense. "Maybe we should see a specialist," Rick suggested, though the idea filled him with a familiar dread. "I don't need a specialist," Amber snapped. "I'm young, I'm healthy. This should be easy." Month 8 brought their first real fight. "Maybe you should get tested again," Amber said, her voice sharp with accusation. "I've never had any problems." "I was tested during my first marriage," Rick replied wearily. "The results were fine." "Well, clearly something has changed," Amber shot back. But privately, doubts had begun to creep into Rick's mind. He found himself thinking about Sarah more often than he wanted to admit. About their years of trying, about the doctors who had assured them both that nothing was wrong, about the possibility that the problem had never been medical at all. What if it had been the stress, the pressure, the weight of expectation crushing the very thing they were trying to create? What if leaving Sarah had been the biggest mistake of his life? He pushed the thoughts away. His old life was behind him. His future was with Amber, and they would figure this out. They had to. Back in Brooklyn, Sarah's pregnancy was progressing, but not without challenges. By her 5th month, true to Dr. Martinez's prediction, her body was struggling. Her blood pressure spiked dangerously. Her ankles swelled to twice their normal size. Simply walking from the bedroom to the kitchen left her breathless and dizzy. Maggie moved in full-time, taking over every household responsibility. Sarah's best friend, Jessica Brooks, a corporate lawyer she'd known since college, stepped in to manage the consulting business, handling client calls and project coordination, while Sarah directed operations from her bed. David Brennan, a former colleague from Sarah's early career, began showing up regularly. He brought groceries, fixed things around the house that were broken, helped Maggie with the heavier tasks of preparing the house for 4 babies. "David, you don't have to do all this," Sarah said one afternoon, watching from her bed as he assembled the 4th crib in what would be the nursery. "I want to," David replied simply, not looking up from the instructions. "You'd do the same for anyone." But they both knew it wasn't about just anyone. David had been quietly in love with Sarah for years, since before she'd met Rick, though he'd never said anything while she was married. Now, watching her navigate this pregnancy alone, his feelings had only deepened. But he was patient. Sarah needed a friend right now, not complications. So he stayed in the background, helping when she needed help, giving her space when she needed space, never pushing for more than she could give. At 32 weeks, everything went wrong. Sarah was at home, participating in a video call with a client, when she felt the first sharp pain. She gasped mid-sentence, her hand going to her stomach. "Sarah?" The client's voice came through the laptop speakers. "Are you okay?" She looked down. Blood. Too much blood. "Maggie!" Sarah called out, her voice rising with panic. Maggie appeared in the doorway, took one look at Sarah's face and the blood, and grabbed her phone. "We need to go now," Maggie said, dialing 911 with shaking fingers. The client was still on the screen. "Sarah, what's happening?" Maggie grabbed the laptop. "She's going into labor," she said quickly, then ended the call. The ambulance ride to Mount Sinai was a blur of pain and fear. Sarah faded in and out of consciousness, aware only of the sirens and Maggie's voice beside her, steady and strong. "Stay with me, baby Farrell. Just stay with me." In the emergency operating room, Dr. Martinez's face appeared above Sarah, urgent and focused. "Sarah, we have a placental abruption. We need to deliver now. The babies are in distress." "It's too early," Sarah managed to say through the pain. "Only 32 weeks. "We don't have a choice," Dr. Martinez said. "Sarah, you're losing too much blood. We have to do this now." The emergency cesarean section was a nightmare of bright lights and urgent voices. Sarah heard fragments. "First baby boy not breathing. NICU team stat." Alarms beeping. Someone shouting about blood pressure dropping. Then darkness. When Sarah woke in the recovery room, groggy from anesthesia and pain medication, Maggie was holding her hand, tears streaming down her face. "My babies," Sarah said, panicked. "Where are my babies?" "They're in the NICU, honey," Maggie said gently. "They're so small, but they're fighters, just like their mama." Sarah insisted on seeing them immediately. A nurse brought a wheelchair, and Maggie pushed her daughter through the sterile hospital corridors to the neonatal intensive care unit. 4 isolettes stood in a row, each containing a tiny infant covered in wires and tubes. The beeping of monitors filled the air, a symphony of fragile life. Baby A, whom Sarah had already named Micah in her heart, weighed 2 pounds 8 ounces. Oxygen tubes ran into his tiny nose. He had experienced breathing complications immediately after birth and had required resuscitation. The nurses had stabilized him, but the next 72 hours would be critical. Baby B, Malcolm, was 2 pounds 5 ounces, the smallest of the 4. His heart rate was irregular, requiring constant monitoring. Baby C, Zara, weighed 3 pounds exactly. She was jaundiced, her tiny body glowing under UV lights. Baby D, Quinn, was the strongest at 3 pounds 2 ounces, but she still couldn't regulate her own body temperature and needed the controlled environment of the isolette. Sarah couldn't hold them yet. She could only touch them through the small holes in the sides of the isolettes, her fingers trembling as they made contact with skin so delicate it seemed translucent. "I did this alone," Sarah whispered, breaking down. "I tried to do everything alone. What if I lose them?" "You're not alone," Maggie said fiercely, wrapping an arm around her daughter's shoulders. "You never were, and these babies are fighters. They have your strength, Sarah, your stubbornness. They're going to make it." The next weeks were the longest of Sarah's life. She refused to leave the NICU, sleeping in a reclining chair between the isolettes, waking at every alarm, every change in the monitor's rhythms. Day 2, Micah's oxygen levels dropped. Doctors rushed in. Sarah stood helpless, watching through glass as they worked to stabilize her son. Day 4, Malcolm's heart rate became critically irregular. More tests, more specialists. Week 1, Zara needed a blood transfusion. Sarah signed the consent forms with shaking hands. Week 2, Quinn finally started gaining weight, the first piece of genuinely good news. Week 3, Micah came off oxygen support. Sarah cried with relief. Week 4, all 4 babies were stable enough for Sarah to hold them for the first time. A nurse helped arrange them, 2 in Sarah's arms, 2 supported by pillows on either side. 4 tiny faces, 4 pairs of eyes struggling to focus. 4 miracles that had fought their way into the world against all odds. Hello, my miracles, Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. Mama's here. Mama's always going to be here. I promise you, you are so loved. So incredibly loved. Maggie took a photo with her phone. Sarah surrounded by her children, her face radiant with joy despite her exhaustion. It was a photograph she would treasure forever. A photograph that would one day change everything. 5 weeks after their birth, all four babies were cleared to go home. Sarah's Brooklyn brownstone transformed into a carefully orchestrated chaos of feeding schedules, diaper changes, and precious little sleep. The reality of quadruplet motherhood hit Sarah like a physical force. 4 babies meant 32 bottles to wash and sterilize every day, 60 diapers every 24 hours, laundry that never, ever ended. One baby would cry, waking the others. What should have been a 30-minute feeding session became a 2-hour marathon. Some nights, Sarah found herself sitting on the nursery floor at 4 in the morning, a baby in each arm and 2 more in bouncy seats, crying from sheer exhaustion. I don't know how to do this, she confessed to Maggie one particularly difficult night. How do people manage one baby? How am I supposed to manage 4? One moment at a time, Maggie replied, taking Micah and Malcolm while Sarah focused on the girls. You don't have to be perfect, baby. You just have to be present. But there were beautiful moments too. The first time all 4 babies smiled at her simultaneously, Sarah understood what people meant when they talked about hearts bursting with joy. It happened on a Tuesday morning when they were 3 months old. She was sitting on the nursery floor, making silly faces and singing off-key lullabies, when suddenly 4 little faces lit up with matching grins. Did you see that? She called to Maggie, who was folding laundry nearby. They all smiled at the same time. They know they've got the best mama in the world, Maggie replied, watching her daughter's face transform with wonder. By the time the babies were 5 months old, Sarah had found a rhythm. It was exhausting and chaotic and financially stretched her to her limits. But they were managing. More than managing, they were thriving. Jessica had kept the consulting business afloat, and Sarah was slowly taking on projects again, working during naps and after bedtime, building back toward stability. David continued to be a steady presence, showing up several times a week with groceries, or to help with repairs, or just to give Sarah and Maggie a few hours of relief. One Sunday afternoon, with all 4 babies napping simultaneously, a minor miracle, Sarah sat on her couch with coffee, sun streaming through the windows of her beautiful Brooklyn brownstone. David had stopped by with fresh bagels and was reading the newspaper at the kitchen table. Maggie was finally taking a nap in her own room. The house was peaceful, full of the quiet sounds of babies sleeping and life settling into place. Sarah looked around at what she had built. A beautiful home, 4 healthy babies, a business that was surviving, a support system of people who genuinely loved her. I don't need Rick, she thought to herself. I never did. I won. But Sarah didn't know that in Connecticut, Rick was about to discover the truth that would shatter his carefully constructed new life. And she didn't know that her moment of peace was about to become the biggest mistake she'd ever made. Rick Ashford was having breakfast with his second wife when his world collapsed for the second time. It was a Saturday morning in late spring, 6 months after Sarah had given birth. Rick and Amber were sitting in their Connecticut estate's breakfast room, sunlight streaming through the windows, illuminating the cracks in their 9-month-old marriage. They had been married for 9 months and still no pregnancy. The tension between them had gone from uncomfortable to toxic. Amber had started making comments about getting Rick tested again, and Rick had started working later just to avoid coming home. He was scrolling through his phone, drinking coffee, trying to ignore Amber's pointed silence when he saw the link. A friend from his business network had shared an article with the comment, "Inspiring story." The headline read, "Brooklyn single mom defies odds, raises quadruplets." Rick clicked idly, more out of boredom than genuine interest. The article loaded, and the photograph at the top made him choke on his coffee. Sarah. His Sarah. Except she wasn't his anymore. Hadn't been for almost a year. She was sitting in a cheerful living room, surrounded by 4 infants. 4 babies who, even in a photograph, bore unmistakable resemblances to the Ashford family. One boy had sandy brown hair the exact shade of Rick's. Another boy had Rick's sharp facial features, the distinctive nose, the shape of the jaw. Two girls, one with fair skin that could have come from either parent, one who looked like Sarah's miniature twin. Rick zoomed in on the photo, his hand is shaking so badly the image blurred. He read the caption, Sarah Montgomery, 28, with her 5-month-old quadruplets, Micah, Malcolm, Zara, and Quinn. 5 months old, 5 months. Rick's mind raced through calculations. 5 months ago was 10 months after their divorce. 10 months minus 9 months of pregnancy meant she had been pregnant during their marriage, possibly even conceived while they were still together. Rick, Amber's voice cut through his thoughts. What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. I have to go, Rick said, standing so abruptly his chair fell backward. Go where? We were going to. But Rick was already moving, grabbing his keys, pulling out his phone to call his lawyer as he headed for the door. Within 24 hours, Rick had hired a private investigator. The report came back with devastating clarity. 4 children, born at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York. Mother, Sarah Montgomery. Father, listed as unknown on all 4 birth certificates. Medical bills totaling $380,000, paid in full by Sarah Montgomery through a personal loan. No record of any communication with Richard Ashford. No attempt to contact him about the pregnancy or the children. Rick studied the photographs the investigator had obtained. There was no question. These were his children. The resemblance was undeniable in every feature, every expression captured by the PI's long-distance camera. For the first time since his divorce, Rick allowed himself to think clearly about what he had done. He had left Sarah, convinced she was the problem. He had married Amber, certain she would give him the children he needed. And all along, Sarah had been carrying his children. 4 of them. The family he had thrown away to chase a ghost. File paternity papers, Rick told his lawyer. Immediately, I want DNA testing, custody evaluation, everything. 1 week later, a process server knocked on Sarah's door in Brooklyn. She answered with Quinn on her hip, the other 3 babies playing on a mat in the living room behind her. Sarah Montgomery, the server asked. Yes. You've been served. The thick envelope contained legal documents that made Sarah's blood run cold. Rick was suing for paternity rights, demanding DNA testing, emergency visitation, a full custody evaluation. The petition was aggressive, painting him as the father who had been cruelly denied knowledge of his children. There was also a note from Rick's lawyer. Client became aware of children through public media. Parental rights cannot be denied. Sarah stood in her doorway, the papers shaking in her hand, watching the process server walk away. She had known this moment might come. She just hadn't expected it to feel like being hit by a truck. That same afternoon, Patricia Ashford called from a number Sarah didn't recognize, since she had blocked Patricia's regular numbers months ago. Those are Ashford children, Sarah. Patricia's voice came through the phone, cold and imperious. Thornwell blood, you had no right to hide them. I had every right, Sarah said, her voice steady despite the rage building inside her. Your son abandoned me. He didn't know you were pregnant. Because he was too busy replacing me to notice, Sarah shot back. Because he was so convinced I was the problem that he threw away our marriage without a second thought. You will regret this, Patricia said, her voice dropping to something darker, more threatening. I will take those children from you. They deserve their proper heritage, the Ashford name, the Thornwell legacy. I've already hired investigators. Every aspect of your life will be scrutinized. Try it, Sarah said coldly. See what happens. She hung up, but her hands were shaking. Within 48 hours, the media landscape had shifted dramatically. The heartwarming story about a single mother raising quadruplets became something more complicated, more controversial. Did Brooklyn mom hide children from billionaire father? One headline screamed. Millionaire Richard Ashford denied knowledge of quadruplets, another announced. Patricia gave a carefully crafted interview to a Society magazine, playing the role of heartbroken grandmother to perfection. We're devastated to learn we have grandchildren we've never met, Patricia told the reporter, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. Sarah has deprived these children of their family, their heritage. We only want what's best for them. Public opinion split down the middle. Sarah's inbox flooded with messages. half supportive, half accusatory. "You're so brave for doing this alone. How could you keep a father from his children? Gold digger baby trapped a millionaire. You're an inspiration to single mothers everywhere." The sponsors who had approached Sarah's consulting and business after her first interview backed away. "Too controversial," they said. "We can't be associated with this right now." The morning show that had celebrated her story reran the interview, and the comments section became a battlefield. Sarah sat in her living room watching her public triumph become a public nightmare, and whispered to Jessica, "I thought going public would protect me." I handed him ammunition. Jessica Brooks, who had been Sarah's best friend since their days at Howard University, was now sitting across from her, reviewing the legal documents Rick had filed. As a corporate lawyer, family law wasn't her specialty, but she was learning fast. "This is bad," Jessica said, not sugarcoating it. "Rick has resources, the Ashford family name, and now he has public sympathy from some quarters. He's painting himself as the victim, the father who was denied his children." "What's worst case scenario?" Sarah asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. "Worst case? Joint custody? You'd have to co-parent with the man who destroyed you. You'd have to hand your babies over to him and Patricia every weekend. Watch them disappear into that Connecticut estate. Wonder what they're being told about you." Sarah felt the walls closing in around her. She had thought she was safe. She had thought her public victory would protect her. Instead, she had exposed herself and her children to exactly the battle she had been trying to avoid. "That's not happening," Sarah said, her voice hard. "I won't let it happen." "Then we need to destroy his credibility completely," Jessica said. "Not just win, annihilate." That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She stood in the nursery, watching her 4 babies sleeping peacefully in their cribs, blissfully unaware of the storm gathering around them. Micah, with his sandy brown hair and warm eyes, slept on his back, one tiny fist curled near his face. Malcolm, still small but growing stronger every day, was curled on his side. Zara slept like a starfish, limbs spread in every direction. Quinn, quiet and observant even in sleep, was perfectly still. "I promise you," Sarah whispered to her sleeping children, "I will protect you. No matter what it takes, you are mine, and nothing will ever change that." But even as she made that promise, Sarah knew the fight ahead would be the hardest thing she had ever faced. Because Richard Ashford, backed by Patricia's money and determination, backed by lawyers who specialized in destroying women like her, was coming for her children. And he wouldn't stop until he got what he wanted. The war room was Jessica's law office on a Tuesday night, well past midnight. Sarah sat at the conference table, exhausted but determined. David had come too, offering to help however he could. Maps of documents covered every surface. "Okay," Jessica said, spreading papers across the table. "Let's assess the damage. Rick has resources, family name, and public sympathy from some quarters. But we have truth on our side. We just need to weaponize it." Sarah opened the box she had brought, the one she had kept hidden in her closet for months. Inside was documentation she had meticulously gathered during her marriage, evidence she had collected without fully knowing why, driven by instinct that something was wrong. She spread it on the table now, every negative pregnancy test from their 5 years of marriage, dated and saved, proving they had tried consistently. Medical records showing both she and Rick had been cleared by specialists, proving neither of them had a fertility problem. Credit card statements from their shared accounts showing hotel charges during their marriage, charges that lined up perfectly with Rick's late nights and mysterious absences. A receipt for $12,000 worth of jewelry purchased 2 months before Rick filed for divorce. The necklace Sarah never received. The necklace that had gone to Amber. Text messages recovered from an old phone Sarah had almost thrown away. Emails discussing divorce, dated during the time Sarah was pregnant, though Rick didn't know it then. "This is good," Jessica said, examining everything with a lawyer's clinical eye. "This proves the adultery timeline. This shows he was planning to leave before he knew about any pregnancy. This demonstrates a pattern of deception." "It's not enough," Sarah said. "He'll claim he loved me. The marriage just didn't work. He made a mistake. We need more." That's when David spoke up. He had been quiet until now, sitting at the far end of the table, clearly wrestling with something. "I need to tell you something about Rick's business," David said finally. Sarah and Jessica both turned to look at him. David took a breath. Thornwell Industries is failing. Rick made some risky investments about 18 months ago, trying to expand too aggressively. They went paying. The company is bleeding money, Bing. How do you know this? Jessica asked sharply. Because I work in real estate investment, David explained. Rick and I have competed for properties before. I have contacts inside some of his financial institutions. The word in the industry is that Thornwell Industries is in serious trouble. He pulled out a folder he had brought, spreading documents across the table. Financial reports, investment analyses, projections that showed a company in crisis. This custody case, David continued, part of it is public relations. Rick needs to look like a stable family man to secure new investors. He needs the optics of being a devoted father to save his business. Sarah stared at the documents, a cold fury building inside her. So this isn't even about the children. It's about his image. Partly, David admitted. There's also this. He pulled out another set of documents. Rick has a substance abuse problem, drinking heavily. There have been 2 DUIs in the past 6 months, both covered up by family money and high-priced lawyers. The records are sealed, but I have a contact in the police department who confirmed it. Jessica grabbed the papers, studying them intently. This is huge. If we can get these DUI records unsealed, if we can prove he has an addiction issue, that completely changes the custody evaluation. The door to the conference room opened. An older man in a wheelchair appeared, oxygen tubes running to his nose, his face gaunt with illness. It was Thomas Ashford, Rick's father. Sarah stood up shocked. Mr. Ashford? What are you doing here? I called him, David said quietly. I thought we needed to hear what he has to say. Thomas wheeled himself to the table with effort. I'm dying, he said without preamble, his voice weak but clear. Stage 4 cancer. I have weeks left, maybe less, and I'm not going to die without trying to make this right. He handed Sarah a thick envelope. Everything you need to destroy Patricia's case is in here. Emails, text messages, private investigator reports, evidence of how she manipulated Rick after Michael died, how she sabotaged your marriage, he paused, the next words clearly difficult, how she knew about your pregnancy and said nothing. Sarah's hand froze on the envelope. She knew? Thomas nodded, tears in his eyes. She had you followed by a private investigator starting about 6 months before Rick filed for divorce. She knew you were pregnant at 3 months. She knew, and she said nothing because she wanted you gone. Her plan was to wait until after the divorce, then use her money and influence to take custody of the children, raising them herself while cutting you out completely. Sarah felt like she'd been punched in the chest. She knew. She knew I was carrying her grandchildren, and she let Rick divorce me anyway. My wife never recovered from losing Michael, Thomas said, his voice breaking. Our older son drowned when he was 14. Patricia transferred all her expectations onto Rick, used grief as a weapon to control him. I was too weak to stop her. I let her destroy my son, and I let her nearly destroy you. He reached across the table and put his frail hand over Sarah's. Use this, destroy her case, protect those children from her. It's my final act, Sarah. I'm protecting my grandchildren from their grandmother. Thomas left shortly after, wheeled out by his nurse, leaving behind an envelope that would change everything. 2 days later, there was another unexpected visitor to Sarah's Brooklyn brownstone. The doorbell rang just after 9 in the morning while Sarah was in the middle of feeding 4 hungry babies their breakfast. Maggie answered the door, and her sharp intake of breath made Sarah look up. Standing on the porch was Amber Valentine, Rick's second ex-wife. I know I have no right to be here, Amber said quickly, before either woman could speak, but I need to talk to Sarah, please. Sarah handed Malcolm to Maggie and walked to the door, studying the woman who had destroyed her marriage. Up close, Amber looked different from her society page photos. Tired. Older than in her 24 years. Scared. What do you want? Sora asked. Not unkindly, but not welcomingly either. To tell you the truth, Amber said, about Rick, about what he's really like, about what he did to both of us. Sarah hesitated, then stepped aside. You have 10 minutes. They sat in the living room while Maggie took the babies into the nursery. Amber perched on the edge of the couch, her hands twisting together nervously. Rick pursued me, Amber said without preamble. Not the other way around. He came to my firm's office for design meetings, and he started asking personal questions. Told me you were cold, career-obsessed, didn't want children. He painted himself as this victim of a loveless marriage. I believed him. She looked up at Sarah, and there were tears in her eyes. I was 24. I'd been in New York for 2 years trying to make it as a designer. When Richard Ashford, this wealthy, handsome man, started paying attention to me, I thought I'd won the lottery. I thought he'd chosen me because I was special. What changed? Sarah asked. The wedding, Amber said bitterly. We got married and immediately everything shifted. He became distant, critical, started making comments about my body, my clothes, whether I was trying hard enough to get pregnant. By month 6, he was openly blaming me for not conceiving. By month 8, he was verbally abusive. Amber pulled out a USB drive from her purse. I recorded some of it. His voicemails, text messages, proof that he's manipulative, emotionally abusive, that he follows a pattern. Find a woman, promise her the world, then destroy her when she doesn't give him what he wants. She handed the drive to Sarah. He's doing to you in court what he did to both of us in our marriages, making you the villain so he looks innocent. But you have something I didn't. You have those beautiful children. You have proof that he was the problem all along. Make him pay, Sarah, for both of us. Why are you doing this? Sarah asked. What do you get out of it? Amber smiled sadly. Revenge. Closure. The satisfaction of knowing I helped stop him from doing to you what he did to me. I was young and stupid when he targeted me. But you deserve better, and those kids deserve better. After Amber left, Sarah sat alone in her living room, holding the USB drive, staring at Thomas's envelope. She had an arsenal now. Evidence from multiple sources, witnesses ready to testify, proof of Rick's lies and Patricia's manipulation. The question was whether it would be enough. The trial was set to begin in 2 weeks. Jessica assembled a legal team, preparing their strategy with military precision. They would start by establishing the affair timeline, then move to the medical evidence, then bring in the character witnesses. Thomas's evidence and Amber's testimony would be their nuclear options, held back until Rick thought he was winning, then deployed with devastating efficiency. We're going to destroy them, Jessica said with quiet confidence. By the time we're done, Rick will be lucky to get supervised visitation. Sarah wanted to believe her, but she couldn't shake the feeling that Patricia had surprises of her own waiting. The woman who had manipulated her son for decades, who had hired private investigators, who had known about Sarah's pregnancy and said nothing, wouldn't go down without a fight. The night before the trial began, Sarah stood in her children's nursery, watching them sleep. They were 6 months old now, growing stronger every day. Micah was already trying to pull himself up. Malcolm had started babbling constantly. Zara laughed at everything. Quinn observed the world with those wise eyes, taking everything in. I'm scared, Sarah whispered to Maggie, who had come to stand beside her. I know, baby girl, Maggie said, putting her arm around her daughter. But you're also ready. You have the truth on your side. And the truth eventually always wins. Sarah wanted to believe that. She had to believe that, because tomorrow she would walk into that courtroom and fight for her children's future. And she would fight with everything she had, using every weapon in her arsenal. Rick Ashford was about to learn what happened when you underestimated a mother protecting her children. He was about to learn that Sarah Montgomery was nobody's victim anymore, and he was about to lose everything that mattered. The Manhattan family court building loomed imposing and gray against a cloudy morning sky. Sarah stood on the steps, flanked by Jessica and Maggie, steeling herself for what was about to unfold inside. Cameras flashed as reporters shouted questions. This case had captured public attention, a drama involving a billionaire real estate mogul, secret quadruplets, and accusations of abandonment that read like a television script. Miss Montgomery, how do you feel about today? Do you regret hiding the children from their father? What would you say to people who call you vindictive? Jessica guided Sarah through the crowd, ignoring all questions. Don't engage, she whispered. Let our case speak for itself. Inside the courtroom, Rick sat at the plaintiff's table with his team of expensive lawyers. He looked haggard, Sarah noticed. thinner than she remembered, with dark circles under his eyes. When their gazes met across the room, something flickered in his expression. Regret, maybe, or just calculation. Beside him sat Patricia, dressed in an immaculate designer suit, her face a mask of composed dignity. The grieving grandmother, ready to play her part. Judge Margaret Anderson entered, and everyone stood. She was a woman in her early 60s, with steel gray hair and an expression that suggested she had seen every family drama imaginable and was impressed by none of them. "Please be seated," Judge Anderson said. "This is a custody hearing regarding 4 minor children. Let me be clear from the outset. My only concern is the welfare of these children. Family wealth, social standing, public opinion, none of that matters in my courtroom. Is that understood?" Both legal teams nodded. "Good. Proceed." Rick's lead attorney, a polished man named Harrison Webb, stood to present his opening statement. "Your Honor, this is a simple case about a father's fundamental right to know his children. My client, Richard Ashford, had no knowledge of these children's existence until he saw a media article 6 months after their birth. He has been systematically denied access to his biological children by Miss Montgomery, who made a unilateral decision to cut him out of their lives entirely." Webb clicked a remote, and a large screen behind him displayed photos of the quadruplets. These 4 children deserve to know their father, their extended family, their heritage. Mr. Ashford is not here to take custody away from Miss Montgomery. He simply asks for shared parenting, for the opportunity to be part of his children's lives. It sounded reasonable, measured, almost sympathetic. Then it was Jessica's turn. "Your Honor," Jessica began, her voice clear and strong, "this is indeed a case about parental rights, but it's also a case about consequences, about a man who abandoned his wife during a vulnerable time, pursued an affair while she struggled with infertility he blamed entirely on her, married his mistress with unseemly haste, and now wants the children he claimed were impossible." Jessica gestured to her own screen, which showed a timeline. Richard Ashford didn't just leave his wife, he destroyed her. And when she picked up the pieces and built a new life, when she accomplished what he claimed she never could, he decided he wanted back in. Not because he loves these children, not because he's committed to being a father, but because it serves his interests to appear as a devoted dad. The battle lines were drawn. Rick took the stand first, his testimony carefully rehearsed to present himself as the sympathetic victim. His lawyer walked him through the discovery of the children, his emotional response, his immediate desire to be involved. "How did you feel when you learned you had children?" Webb asked. "Devastated," Rick said, and tears actually appeared in his eyes. "These are my children. I miss their births, their first months of life. Those are moments I can never get back. If I'd known Sarah was pregnant, I would have been there. I would have supported her through the pregnancy and delivery. Even though your marriage had ended." "These are my children," Rick repeated, looking directly at the judge. "Nothing else matters more than that." It was a good performance. Sarah had to give him that much. When it was Jessica's turn to cross-examine, she started gently. "Mr. Ashford, you testified that you would have been there for Miss Montgomery if you'd known about the pregnancy. Is that correct?" "Yes." "Even though you had filed for divorce?" "Yes, children change everything." "I see." Jessica pulled out a document. "Can you tell me what date you filed for divorce from Miss Montgomery?" Rick's lawyer provided the date. Jessica wrote it on a whiteboard visible to the entire courtroom. "And when did you become engaged to Amber Valentine?" The date was only 3 weeks later. Jessica wrote that date on the board too, the proximity impossible to miss. 3 weeks, Jessica said. "You moved from ending your first marriage to beginning your second relationship in 3 weeks. Does that seem like the behavior of someone committed to working through difficulties?" "My relationship with Amber began after my marriage ended," Rick said stiffly. "Did it?" Jessica asked. "We'll come back to that. Tell me, Mr. Ashford, during your 5-year marriage to Sarah Montgomery, were you trying to have children?" "Yes, actively." "And when pregnancy didn't occur, who did you believe was at fault?" Rick hesitated. "I don't think I blamed anyone." Jessica pulled out another document. "This is a text message you sent to your business partner, Derek Hayes, dated 2 months before you filed for divorce. Would you read it aloud for the court?" Rick's face went pale as he recognized the message. His lawyer objected, but the judge overruled. Rick read in a flat voice, 5 years with Sarah and nothing. At this point, I have to accept she's the problem. Maybe it's time to cut my losses. The courtroom murmured. Rick's carefully constructed image was starting to crack. Cut your losses, Jessica repeated. Is that how you viewed your wife of 5 years? As a loss to be cut? I was frustrated. I said something I didn't mean. You said something you very much meant, Jessica countered. You blamed Sarah entirely for the inability to conceive, despite medical evidence showing you both were healthy. And then you left her for a younger woman you believed could give you what Sarah supposedly couldn't. Isn't that the truth? I loved Sarah, Rick said, but his voice lacked conviction. You loved the idea of what Sarah could give you, Jessica shot back. When she couldn't give you children, you discarded her. And now that she's proven you wrong, now that she's given birth to 4 healthy babies, you want back in. Not because you love these children. You've never even met them, but because they serve your interests. Rick had no response to that. Patricia Ashford took the stand next, the picture of dignified grandmotherhood. She spoke eloquently about family heritage, about the opportunities the Ashford name could provide, about her desire to know her grandchildren. I only want what's best for these children, Patricia said, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. They deserve to know their family, their legacy. Then when Jessica began her cross-examination, she started with simple questions about the Ashford family, about Patricia's role in Rick's life, building toward the bombshell she was about to drop. Mrs. Ashford, you've testified about the importance of family. Can you tell me about your relationship with Sarah Montgomery during her marriage to your son? Patricia's expression tightened slightly. I was always cordial. Cordial. Jessica pulled out a printout. Is this your email address? Patricia looked at the paper and nodded curtly. Would you read this email, dated during Sarah and Rick's 4th year of marriage, sent to your sister? Patricia's face went from composed to horrified as she recognized the email. Thomas had provided everything. She read in a tight voice. She's not our kind of people. I don't understand Richard's fascination with her. Perhaps if she remains unable to fulfill her primary purpose, he'll come to his senses. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Anderson banged her gavel for order. Her primary purpose, Jessica repeated. You viewed Sarah Montgomery as breeding stock for the Ashford family. Is that correct? That's taken out of context. Let me show you another email. Jessica projected it on the screen. This one is dated 3 years ago, sent to a private investigator you hired. Would you read it? Patricia's hands shook. I declined to answer on the grounds, You're not being charged with a crime, Mrs. Ashford, Judge Anderson interrupted. Answer the question. Patricia read through clenched teeth. Confirmed subject is pregnant. Do not inform my son. I'll handle this after the divorce is final. The courtroom exploded. Even Judge Anderson's eyes widened. You knew, Jessica said, her voice cutting through the noise. You knew Sarah Montgomery was carrying your grandchildren, and you deliberately chose not to tell your son. I thought, Patricia stammered, her composure completely shattered. You thought if Rick married Amber, if he moved on completely, you could later use your money and influence to take custody of these children while cutting Sarah out of the picture entirely. Isn't that true? Patricia's silence was answer enough. Jessica turned to the judge. Your Honor, we have extensive documentation of Mrs. Ashford's manipulation, not just of this case, but of her son's entire life. She used the death of her older son, Michael, to control Rick, transferred all her expectations onto him, and has spent years sabotaging his relationships to maintain that control. She doesn't want what's best for these children. She wants possessions she can control. Judge Anderson looked at Patricia with barely concealed disgust. Mrs. Ashford, you're excused from the stand. I'll be referring this testimony to the prosecutor's office for investigation into potential obstruction of justice. Patricia stumbled from the witness stand, her social armor completely demolished. Rick stared at his mother in shock and betrayal, clearly learning this information for the first time. The trial recessed for the day, but the damage was done. Social media exploded with headlines. Grandmother knew about secret babies, said nothing. Patricia Ashford's plot to steal grandchildren exposed. Sarah left the courthouse with Jessica and Maggie ignoring the press, but she could see in Jessica's face that they'd won a major victory. "That was just day one," Jessica said. "Tomorrow we bring in the medical testimony, the proof of the affair, and if we need it, Amber's evidence. We're going to bury them." But Sarah couldn't celebrate yet, because tomorrow would bring 3 catastrophes that would nearly destroy everything they'd built, and she had no idea they were coming. Day 2 of the trial began with a surprise witness for Rick's side, a court-appointed psychologist who had evaluated both parents without Sarah's knowledge of the full scope of the evaluation. Dr. Lawrence Mitchell took the stand and delivered his report with clinical detachment. "While Miss Montgomery has provided adequate care for the children thus far, I have concerns about the long-term sustainability of her current arrangement. Raising quadruplets alone, even with family support, creates significant stress. I observe signs of anxiety and exhaustion in Miss Montgomery that raise questions about whether she can maintain this level of care without co-parenting support." Jessica jumped to her feet. "Your Honor, this evaluation was supposed to be limited to home environment assessment. Dr. Mitchell was not authorized to make recommendations about custody arrangements." "The report is already entered into evidence," Rick's lawyer countered. "The court ordered a psychological evaluation. Dr. Mitchell has provided one." Judge Anderson looked displeased but overruled Jessica's objection. "The court will consider this testimony as one factor among many." "Continue." Sarah's stomach churned. The doctor's report made her sound like she was on the verge of collapse, unstable, inadequate. It wasn't true, but the damage was done. She could see the judge making notes, could feel the momentum shifting. Then her phone vibrated, a text from the daycare. "Quinn had a seizure, called 911. They're taking her to Mount Sinai." Sarah's blood turned to ice. She grabbed Jessica's arm. "I have to go. Quinn's in the hospital." "What?" Jessica whispered urgently. "Sarah, we're in the middle of—" "My daughter is in an ambulance," Sarah said, standing up. "I'm going, now." Rick's lawyer immediately pounced. "Your Honor, this demonstrates exactly what Dr. Mitchell was describing. Miss Montgomery is unable to handle the stress of caring for 4 children. She's leaving this custody hearing because her child is having a medical emergency," Jessica interrupted sharply. "If Mr. Ashford were a real parent, he'd be running out of here too." But Rick stayed seated, and Sarah saw the calculation in his eyes. He was going to use this. Sarah ran from the courtroom, Maggie close behind her. At Mount Sinai, they found Quinn in the emergency room, tiny sensors attached to her head, doctors running tests. "It was a febrile seizure," the attending physician explained, "caused by a spike in her fever. We're running tests to determine the underlying cause, but it could be as simple as a viral infection." Sarah held Quinn's small hand, watching her daughter's face, fighting back tears. The baby had only been seizing for 30 seconds before daycare staff intervened, but 30 seconds felt like a lifetime when it was your child. Her phone buzzed with texts from Jessica. "Rick's team is arguing that this proves you're overwhelmed. Judge let trial continue without you. I'm fighting it, but Sarah, this looks bad." Back at the courthouse, Rick's lawyer was indeed making that exact argument. "Your Honor, Miss Montgomery has chosen to leave these proceedings. While I sympathize with her child's medical situation, this demonstrates the impossibility of her current arrangement. She cannot be in court fighting for custody and simultaneously managing medical emergencies for 4 children. My client, with his resources and family support system, can provide stability these children desperately need." Jessica fought back hard, but without Sarah there to humanize the argument, without her presence to remind everyone why she was fighting, the legal arguments felt hollow. Then came the second catastrophe. Jessica's phone rang. It was a contact at the courthouse. The court-appointed custody evaluator had submitted an updated preliminary report, one that had been influenced, Jessica discovered, by $50,000 in consulting fees paid by Patricia Ashford to the evaluator's firm. The report recommended shared custody, suggesting that both parents should have equal access to the children pending final determination. Jessica wanted to scream. Patricia had found a way to buy influence even after her courtroom humiliation. The corruption was subtle enough to be deniable, but effective enough to change the judge's thinking. The third catastrophe came an hour later. Sarah returned to the courthouse to find Jessica in a side conference room, her face pale. The judge issued a preliminary ruling, Jessica said. She's inclined to grant temporary joint custody pending the final hearing. What? Sarah felt the floor drop out from under her. No, that can't happen. I tried to stop it, Jessica said desperately. But with you gone, with Quinn's medical emergency, with this corrupted evaluation report, the judge is concerned that you're overwhelmed. She thinks having Rick co-parent might actually help you. Sarah wanted to laugh at the absurdity. The man who had destroyed her was now being positioned as her savior. The man who had never changed a diaper, who had never woken at 3 in the morning to 4 crying babies, who knew nothing about Micah's allergies or Malcolm's sleep schedule or Zara's fear of loud noises or Quinn's special way of wanting to be held. That man was going to get custody of her children. I'm going to lose them, Sarah whispered. After everything, I'm going to lose my children. Jessica grabbed her shoulders. You're not losing anything. We still have Thomas's evidence. We have Amber's testimony. We can turn this around. But Sarah, I need you to be strong for one more day. Can you do that? Sarah thought about her 4 babies, about the promises she'd made them, about the life she'd built from nothing. I can do it, she said. I have to. But as they walked back into the courtroom, Sarah felt terror like she'd never known. She was facing the real possibility that her children would be taken from her, handed over to the man who had tried to throw her away like garbage. And then the doors opened and everything changed. A man in a wheelchair was being pushed into the courtroom by a nurse. Thomas Ashford, oxygen tank attached to his chair, looking like death but determined to be here. Your Honor, Thomas said, his voice weak but clear, I have evidence this court needs to see. I'm dying. This is my last chance to make things right. Please, let me testify. Judge Anderson studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Proceed. Thomas's testimony lasted 40 minutes. He presented every piece of evidence of Patricia's manipulation, of her payments to the custody evaluator, of her decades-long campaign to control Rick, of her plan to steal the children from Sarah. He spoke about his own cowardice, about watching his wife destroy their son and doing nothing to stop it. He spoke about his regret, about his determination to protect his grandchildren and from repeating the same patterns. By the time he finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. Patricia sat hunched over, her face buried in her hands. Rick looked like he'd been struck by lightning, his entire worldview crumbling. Jessica then called Amber Valentine to the stand. Amber testified about Rick's pattern of emotional abuse, about the lies he told her about Sarah, about how he had pursued her while still married. She played recordings of his voicemails, his angry tirades when she didn't get pregnant fast enough. The recordings were brutal. Rick's voice, venomous and cruel, saying things that made Sarah flinch even though they weren't directed at her. You're useless. What good are you if you can't give up me a child? That's all I needed from you, and you can't even do that right. The courtroom sat in stunned silence. Finally, Rachel Martinez testified via video about Sarah's high-risk pregnancy, about the emergency delivery, about the medical bills totaling $380,000 that Sarah paid herself. Jessica displayed the hospital bills on the screen, then introduced one more piece of evidence, an insurance notification that had been sent to Rick's office 4 weeks after the babies were born. Mr. Ashford, Jessica said, turning to face him directly, you received official notice from Mount Sinai Hospital about the birth of quadruplets to Sarah Montgomery, listing you as potential father. You threw it away. You dismissed it as a billing error because the idea that Sarah could have succeeded where you believed she had failed was too threatening to your ego. Isn't that true? Rick had no answer. His silence condemned him more thoroughly than any words could have. Judge Anderson called a recess. When she returned 30 minutes later, her expression was grim. I've reviewed all the evidence presented today, she said, and I have reached a decision. Sarah held her breath. Judge Margaret Anderson looked out over the courtroom, her expression grave and determined. The gallery was packed, reporters in the back rows, David sitting with Maggie, Thomas still in his wheelchair near the front. I've presided over family court for 25 years, Judge Anderson began, her voice carrying the weight of authority earned through decades of difficult decisions. This case is one of the most disturbing I've encountered. She turned to Rick. Mr. Ashford, you abandoned your wife during a vulnerable time. You pursued an affair while she struggled with infertility you blamed entirely on her. You married your mistress with unseemly haste. You received official notification of your children's births and discarded it as impossible because it contradicted your narrative that Sarah was the problem. And now you want the children you claimed could never exist. Rick's face was ashen, his expensive lawyers looking uncomfortable beside him. Judge Anderson turned to Patricia. Mrs. Ashford, your manipulation of these proceedings is reprehensible. I'm referring your conduct to the Bar Association and to prosecutors for investigation into bribery and obstruction of justice. You will face consequences for what you've done here. Patricia sat motionless, her social armor completely destroyed. Then Judge Anderson looked at Sarah, and her expression softened slightly. Miss Montgomery, you made a choice to not inform Mr. Ashford of your pregnancy. While I understand your reasoning, and while his conduct certainly justified your caution, that choice did deprive him of knowledge of his children's existence during their first months of life. Sarah's heart sank. Here it came, the however that would give Rick what he wanted. However, Judge Anderson continued, and Sarah braced herself, biology doesn't make someone a father. Showing up makes someone a father. Character makes someone a father. And Mr. Ashford, you have shown neither the character nor the commitment required. She read from her decision. Primary physical and legal custody is granted to Sarah Montgomery. Mr. Ashford is granted supervised visitation only, 2 hours every other Saturday, with a court-appointed monitor present. Rick stood up. Your Honor, please. I'm not finished, Judge Anderson said sharply. Before any unsupervised visits can occur, you must complete parenting classes. 12 weeks of individual therapy, 12 weeks of anger management, and submit to substance abuse evaluation and treatment if indicated. You must pass drug and alcohol screening before each visit. No overnight visits until these children are at least 5 years old, and only then if you successfully complete all requirements and pass a psychiatric evaluation. She continued with the financial arrangements. Child support is set at $50,000 per month, retroactive to the children's birth. You owe Miss Montgomery $300,000 in back support, payable immediately. You will reimburse all of her medical expenses from the pregnancy and delivery, totaling $380,000. You will pay all of her legal fees, totaling $175,000. And you will establish college funds for each child with an initial deposit of $500,000 per child. Rick looked like he might collapse. That was over $2 million in immediate payments, plus ongoing support. Judge Anderson turned to Patricia. Mrs. Ashford, you are prohibited from any contact with these children pending the conclusion of the criminal investigation into your conduct. A restraining order is in place requiring you to stay 500 feet from Miss Montgomery and the children. You will have no visitation rights until these children turn 18 and can decide for themselves if they wish to know you. Patricia stood shakily. Your Honor, I'm their grandmother. You're a woman who knew about these children and hid that knowledge to serve your own interests, Judge Anderson said coldly. You attempted to bribe court officials. You planned to steal custody from a capable mother. You are fortunate I'm not holding you in contempt right now. Sit down. Patricia sat. Judge Anderson looked at Rick one final time. Mr. Ashford, you are fortunate I'm granting you any access at all. Your conduct has been appalling. Supervised visitation is a privilege, not a right. If you fail to complete your requirements, if you miss scheduled visits, if you show any sign of substance abuse or emotional instability, you will lose even that privilege. These children deserve better than what you've shown them so far. Prove yourself worthy of them or accept that you've lost your chance. She banged her gavel. Court is adjourned. The courtroom erupted. Reporters rushed for the doors. Rick sat stunned, his lawyers gathering papers with mechanical efficiency. Patricia was escorted out by security, her face a mask of shock and fury. Sarah sat frozen for a moment, unable to believe what had just happened. Then Jessica grabbed her in a fierce hug. We won, Jessica whispered. Sarah, we won everything. Maggie was crying. David stood nearby, a huge smile on his face. Even Thomas, weak as he was, managed a satisfied nod before his nurse wheeled him toward the exit. Outside the courthouse, press swarmed. Sarah stood on the steps with Jessica and Maggie, the spring sun warm on her face. "Miss Montgomery," a reporter called, "how do you feel about the verdict?" Sarah looked directly into the cameras. "3 years ago, I was told I was broken, defective, unable to give my husband what he wanted. Today, a court confirmed what I always knew. I was never the problem. I am a mother to 4 extraordinary children who are loved, safe, and thriving." She paused, thinking about all the women watching who had been told they weren't enough, who had been made to feel small, who had questioned their worth. "To anyone who's been told they're not enough," Sarah continued, "you are. Don't let someone else's inability to see your worth become your truth. Build your own life. Define your own success. And never, ever let anyone make you feel less than extraordinary." She turned and walked away from the cameras, from the courthouse, from the man who had tried to destroy her. Rick exited moments later, immediately surrounded by reporters. "Mr. Ashford, is it true your mother knew about the pregnancy and hid it from you?" "No comment," Rick said, his voice hollow. "How do you feel about being restricted to supervised visitation?" "No comment." "Do you regret how you treated your ex-wife?" Rick stopped walking. For a moment, something flickered across his face. Genuine emotion, perhaps, regret, loss, the recognition of everything he'd thrown away. "Yes," he said quietly, "I regret everything." Then he got into his car and drove away, alone. The next few days were a whirlwind. Thomas Ashford died 48 hours after the trial, peacefully in his sleep. His will was read 3 days later, and Sarah attended at the request of his executor. Thomas left his entire personal estate, $50 million, in trust for the 4 children, with Sarah named as trustee. The money would be available for their education, health care, and well-being, managed by Sarah until each child turned 25. The letter he left explained, "Hera, forgive an old man his cowardice. I should have protected you and Rick both from Patricia's poison. Instead, I let her destroy my son and nearly destroy you. Please let my grandchildren know their grandfather loved them, even though he never met them. Use this money to give them the life Patricia would have denied them." Sarah cried, reading his words. Thomas had tried, in the end, to make things right. Patricia Ashford was charged with attempted bribery of a court official and obstruction of justice. She pleaded guilty to avoid trial and received 2 years probation, 500 hours of community service, and a $50,000 fine. More devastating than the legal consequences was the social destruction. Every charity board dropped her. Every country club revoked her membership. The society magazines that had once fawned over her now published scathing exposés about her manipulation and corruption. The woman who had valued reputation above all else watched her reputation burn to the ground. Rick completed his court-mandated requirements. He attended every parenting class, every therapy session, every anger management course. He passed his substance abuse evaluation and stopped drinking entirely. He showed up for his supervised visits every other Saturday, bringing age-appropriate toys, sitting awkwardly in the playroom of the visitation center while a court monitor watched. The children were polite to him. They accepted his gifts with the casual acceptance of toddlers who don't yet understand complicated adult relationships. But they didn't call him Daddy. They called him Richard, because that's what Sarah called him, and they didn't know he was supposed to be anything more. Meanwhile, David Brennan had become a constant presence in their lives. He helped with the children several times a week, taught Micah how to throw a ball, read books to Malcolm, played dress-up with Zara, and engaged Quinn in the complex conversations she seemed to crave, despite being barely 3 years old. One evening, 6 months after the trial, David and Sarah sat on her back porch after the children were finally asleep. The Brooklyn brownstone's small backyard was strung with lights, creating a peaceful oasis in the city. "I need to tell you something," David said, setting down his coffee cup. Sarah looked at him, this man who had been beside her through everything, expecting nothing in return. "I've been in love with you for 5 years," David said simply, "since before you met Rick. I never said anything because you were happy, and I wanted you to be happy, even if it wasn't with me. But Sarah, I'm not asking you to love me back. I'm not asking you to date me or marry me or anything. I just need you to know that you are loved, completely, exactly as you are." Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes. "David, you don't have to say anything," he interrupted gently. "I'm not going anywhere. I'll still be here tomorrow and the day after and the day after that. Whether you want me as a friend or something more or just the guy who helps with the kids. I just needed you to know." Sarah reached across the table and took his hand. "I think I could love you," she said softly. "I think I already do, actually. But I need time. I need to heal from everything that happened. I need to be just me for a while longer." David smiled. "I told you. I'm not going anywhere. Take all the time you need." 1 year after the trial, Sarah Montgomery stood on the stage at the same Manhattan Plaza Hotel where this story began, this time as the keynote speaker at a charity gala supporting single mothers. She was introduced as Sarah Montgomery, CEO of Montgomery Consulting Group, founder of the Second Chance Foundation, advocate for single mothers, and mother of 4. The standing ovation lasted 2 full minutes. "1 year ago," Sarah began, "I stood in a courtroom and fought for my children. Tonight, I want to talk about the thousands of mothers who fight every day without headlines, without support, without resources." She announced the Second Chance Foundation, funded by Thomas Ashford's estate, which would provide legal aid, childcare support, job training, and financial assistance to single mothers facing custody battles. "No woman should have to fight alone," Sarah said. "No mother should be told she's not enough because she doesn't have wealth or family connections or a man beside her. We are enough. We have always been enough." In the front row, David sat watching with open love on his face. They were officially dating now, taking things slowly, building a foundation of friendship and trust. The children adored him, though they still called him Uncle David. Beside David sat Maggie, proud grandmother, forever protector. Jessica was there with her husband and baby. In the back of the ballroom, barely visible, Rick Ashford stood alone. He had completed all his requirements and now had unsupervised visits with the children every Saturday. But they still didn't call him Dad. They still didn't run to him with the same joy they showed when David walked through the door. He watched Sarah on stage, radiant and powerful, and saw clearly what he had thrown away. The woman he had called broken had built an empire. The wife he had replaced had created a family more beautiful than anything he would ever have. As Sarah finished her speech and stepped off the stage, the 4 children, now 3.5 years old, ran to meet her. Micah and Malcolm each grabbed a hand. Zara wrapped herself around Sarah's leg. Quinn walked beside them with her characteristic quiet observation. The photographer asked for a family photo. Sarah gathered her children close, David and Maggie joining them, all of them smiling at the camera. A real family, built on love and choice rather than obligation and blood. Rick watched from the back of the room, and for the first time, he truly understood what he had lost. Not just children, not just a wife, but the chance to be part of something real, something beautiful, something that mattered. Later that night after the gala, after the children were tucked into bed with stories and kisses, Sarah stood in her brownstone living room, looking at the photograph the professional had taken. Her 4 children, healthy and happy, her mother, forever her rock. David, patient and loving, and herself at the center of it all, no longer broken or inadequate or not enough. Just Sarah, just herself. And that was everything. "Mama," Quinn said from the doorway, supposed to be asleep but never quite managing it. "Why that man at the party looks sad?" Sarah picked up her daughter, settling her on her hip. "Because he lost something very precious, sweetheart." "What'd he lose?" Quinn asked, her wise eyes studying her mother's face. Sarah looked around at her life, at everything she had built from ashes, at the family she had created through sheer determination and love. "Everything that matters," Sarah said softly. She carried Quinn back to bed, tucking her in beside her siblings, and whispered the same words she whispered every night. "You are loved, you are wanted, you are enough, and nothing will ever change that." As Sarah turned out the lights and closed the nursery door, she felt at peace. Sometimes revenge wasn't about destroying someone. Sometimes revenge was building a life so beautiful, so full, so complete, that the person who tried to break you could only watch from the outside, knowing exactly what they had thrown away. Richard Ashford would spend the rest of his life regretting his choices, watching his children grow up with another man as their father figure, seeing Sarah thrive without him. And Sarah would spend her life loving her children, building her business, creating change for women who had been told they weren't enough. She had been told she was broken. She had proven she was extraordinary. And that, in the end, was the greatest victory of all.